thank you so much for being part of Three Questions.
Thank you. My pleasure to be here.
You're going to retire this year.
This year, at the end of the year, December 31st, my last day, and we're currently looking for the person who will follow in my footsteps.
What will that person be like? Does he have to be like you, or she?
The person doesn't have to be like me. They need, however, to be willing to move to Utah if they're not already here, and they need to be formally trained so that they can then be full-time as pastor of the Calvary Church, working in the community as well as working at the church.
As you look back over your time here in Utah, and especially leading Calvary Baptist Church, what are the things that stand out in your mind as the real milestones?
Well, the first real milestone was seeing some little old lady who felt that she could relate to me as a young person and get her spiritual needs met. Second milestone, we completed a housing project for the elderly, low-income, subsidized housing, and that was a second milestone. A third is we built a brand new facility called Calvary Baptist Church on State Street.
And as you look at the congregation and how it has grown over the years, how would you characterize the state of the congregation right now?
I would say the congregation is in good shape, that it has grown over the years from a few hundred to several hundred, that it is now productive both in terms of the spiritual affairs and whatever else causes people to hurt.
This must have been satisfying work for you. You were only going to stay here for a year.
I came for 1 year, and at the end of that year, almost at the end of that year, I was asked if I'd stay for another year, and I stayed for another year, and now here it is 40 plus years later.
Back at that point in your life, what made you say yes to staying in Utah?
Oh, I said yes because I saw when I first came here firsthand the challenges of race, the challenges of just being a part of the political system here in the state of Utah, and the need of the people to have somebody who could be a spokesperson that was perhaps not a part of the in-group.
Do you feel satisfied that you were able to accomplish the goals that you set out to accomplish?
I think we've accomplished what we set out to accomplish. I think we've been able to get a lot of work done, although there's still a lot to be done, but we've gotten a lot done.
Let's move on to the topic that we are here to discuss, and that is racism, both here in Utah and in our nation. Recently, a Utah Jazz fan was expelled for life, banned for life from Vivint Smart Home Arena because of his racist and degrading comments he made to Russell Westbrook during a game. Right as you think that we're making progress in defeating racism, an incident like this comes up, and then you go, I guess we're not making as much progress as we thought. Can you explain why it is that we are going 2 steps forward and 1 step back?
Well, I think, first of all, we are going 2 steps forward and 1 backwards because we're not taking action like the Jazz organization took in this case when somebody acts inappropriately, behaves inappropriately, says something that they ought not say. That's racist. And we have allowed things to happen and people to just get away with it, go on and if nothing had happened. But in this case, direct action was taken almost immediately. The response of the players has been vibrant, and I appreciate that. And I hope that it'll teach the rest of us a lesson about how we can avoid making those steps backwards.
The Utah Jazz as an organization moved as an institution to take action that way.
Indeed it did.
But what can we do as individuals? Let's say it's not the same scenario. Let's say that there isn't an institution or an organization involved. What can we do as individuals to make sure that that kind of thing does not take hold here?
There are a number of things that we can do. First of all, we have to educate ourselves about who we are. Make sure that we are fully aware of our own being and our role and what our participation silently or verbally, is in terms of the process. That's the first thing, is to educate oneself. Second thing is to take action, to not tolerate the behavior of our friends, our colleagues, and others who are about us, who are doing some things that they ought not do. And then thirdly, we've got to get the laws adjusted so that they are enforced appropriately. The state of Utah has recently passed a hate crime bill, for example. It took years to get that bill passed. But that sort of law needs to be more common in terms of dealing with the issues of racism.
Many in Utah's white population will say, race problem? What race problem? And to a black person living in Utah, what does racism and white privilege actually look like?
Well, I think, first of all, that if people make that sort of comment and take that position, that they're looking at the statistics and they're counting the number of people who are in this community who are African Americans. 2%, 3% at the most of the population would be African American. And they're looking at that and saying, well, it can't be a problem. But they are ignoring the fact that there are no African American CEOs, there are no African Americans that are at the head of any of our colleges, there are no African Americans that are at the top of almost any organization, including our television stations, by the way, that there are no African Americans that are the anchors and are doing those kinds of jobs. And that's what it starts to look like. And then beyond that, the disparities that exist in the healthcare area because of race, because of education, and so forth.
What you're describing has to do with demographics.
Indeed.
And I understand that side of the issue, but I'm talking about a mindset that is inclusatory, where it doesn't matter what color your skin is, or it only matters what can you do and what can you bring to the table. How do we get to that point?
I think that's the real challenge that we have in terms of race and racism, is that people who are not affected directly tend not to want to be engaged, involved. But until we all realize that we're in this boat together and that all of us are affected by whatever happens to any one person, if it happens because they're race, there's an old saying that they came for the Jews, and it goes down the line from one group to the other, and then they finally came for me, and there was nobody to do anything at all. And that's the mindset that has allowed us to function, to get along without doing any substantive changes.
We know that racism is transferred from generation to generation, but beyond that construct, where does racism really come from? I mean, what is the mindset that excuses the treatment of people who are not of our own race poorly? Where does that mindset come from?
It started with our country's structure. We built our country with a constitution. Given the best document for governing a country that I know of, but we built it on a tier system. And we said that some people are full human beings in the Constitution, some are no human beings in the Constitution, and some are part human being. And whenever you do that, you set up a superior, inferior kind of mindset. And until we get rid of that, we'll always have that mindset that some people are better than other people. Some are, because of their race, relegated to this role or to that role, and the mindset will hold.
Even hundreds of years later. Hundreds of years later, we are dealing with what was institutional on the part of the government, inequalities, but that has been essentially wiped out through legislation, supposedly, but yet it lingers.
Well, institutional racism still exists, is alive and well, and that is perhaps the greatest challenge. The individuals, we can deal with the individuals, but it's the institutional racism that exists when the institution allows people to say, to behave any kind of way toward another person simply because they're different.
In an essay, recent essay, Utah Jazz forward Kyle Carver said, and I want to quote this because these are his words: "No matter how unwavering my support is for NBA and WNBA players of color, I'm still in this conversation from the privileged perspective of opting into it," which of course means that on the flip side, I could just as easily opt out
Right.
of it. Every day, I'm given the choice. I'm granted that privilege based on the color of my skin. What he's saying here is that because of the color of his skin, he is free to either deal with racism or not deal with racism,
Right.
which on the other side of that coin is that if he were a person of color, he would not
free.
have that privilege.
That's absolutely.
So my question to you is this: what is it that white people, even those of us who are trying to correct this problem, what is it that white people don't get about racism?
Well, they don't get that racism toward a person because of their black skin, for example, or other colors of skin, causes them also to be affected. Martin Luther King said that if you're going to keep a man in the ditch, you got to stay there with him. And the same is true with racism. If we don't deal with the mistreatment and the poor behavior toward one group of people, then it will eventually start to affect each of us. Healthcare is a great example, for example. If you think of healthcare and the disparities that exist there, every time when you go to the doctor and I go to the doctor, I have insurance, you have insurance, but my bill is just a little more because of the people who don't have it. And the same would be true with racism. If you treat a person negatively and badly and poorly, then eventually it will come home to you.
As a pastor, you know very well that getting someone to change is an exercise in having them change from the inside out. Nothing that you can overtly do will change anyone. They have to want to change, and they have to have a strong enough desire to change.
Indeed.
In this setting, when we're talking about racism, how do we as a society, those of us who are trying to help others, have that change of heart? How do we go about doing that in a way that will be effective, knowing that outside influences don't work?
I think we've gotten the outside piece handled, passing the laws, getting more of those enforced as they ought to be, so that the outside piece is handled. Attitude, though, is where the real challenge is. It takes about 40, 50 years to change an attitude. And if you teach people for years and years that they are superior, then they start to treat other people as inferiors. And it's going to take time, education, it's going to take a lot of hard work, a one-on-one kind of relationship. I've got to get to know you, you've got to get to know me, and together we learn how to walk together in the same direction.
Now, we all harbor prejudices, and not just of dealing with skin color, but with education and background and income status and religion and all of these different prejudices that we have. Is there such a thing as a healthy prejudice?
I think there is healthy prejudice if you separate the good from the bad, that the prejudice toward the bad is perhaps a good place to be prejudiced, is to say that this is a bad behavior, this is a bad action, and I don't like it. But if it is a good behavior, then you cannot practice prejudice toward that behavior and be a good person.
There are families in Utah who have adopted black children or are made up of mixed ethnicities, whether by marriage or some other way. And by way of full disclosure, my family is one of them. What do those families bring to the table in this discussion, and what do they need to be aware of?
They bring, first of all, to the table an opportunity to start at their own home. And that's where everybody has to start, is you've got to start at your own place, with your own family, with yourself, and that opportunity is there. In addition to that opportunity, though, they have opportunity to change the pictures that hang on the wall so that they reflect the diversity that exists, to change the materials that are being read so that the books are not just textbooks about one group of people, but they're textbooks about all of the contributions that everybody is making. And then perhaps we saw it best on some of the television shows. We changed the music that we listen to. Everybody is affected positively by music. You can watch a small child at the red light singing a song to the radio. They like music. And so if you change the music so that it is not about how bad people are, but about how good they are, and then we can start to move forward.
Safety. Let's talk about safety. One of the foundations of finding peace in this life is feeling safe. And I'm not just talking about physical safety, I'm talking about emotional and psychological safety as well. How do we go about helping each other feel emotionally safe?
Emotional safety has to do with seeing somebody else like yourself that is safe. And from there, you can gather that you can be safe as well. That if the police department, for example, had people of color that were part of their staff, then they could say to people of color, you're welcome here, you're safe here, this is a place that you can come and find peace. If we've found in the medical field adequate providers who could handle the medical cases and do that without any kind of unfair discrimination toward a person because of their color. I went to a doctor not so long ago, by the way, and the doctor looked at me, asked me what my situation was, but never touched me. And I don't know how you can diagnose the kind of issues that I was complaining about without touching a person.
That happened recently? Here in Utah?
Recently here in Utah. Does it hurt there? Can you feel this? Can you feel that? But we've got to have more and more of the involvement of the majority at a level so that they are concerned about the minority.
Do you ever have experiences in common, everyday, ordinary activities, going grocery shopping or going to the doctor or going to the DMV or wherever it is, where the color of your skin either subtly or overtly becomes part of the equation of that experience?
I do, regularly. In fact, I refuse to go to a mall in Salt Lake County, period. And the reason I refuse to go to a mall is because I know that as soon as I walk through the door, the guy with the cowboy hat and the boots on and the blue jeans is going to be standing nearby. And I know that if I go to another department in that same store, that same cowboy hatted, booted, blue jean guy is going to be there. And wherever I go and until I leave the store, I'm going to be followed. I also get pulled over regularly by the local authorities. And most of the time they say, okay, Reverend, we're going to let you go because they find out I'm the Reverend. But as long as I was just a black man, what if it was my son who's not a Reverend? Yeah. As long as I'm just a black man, they feel they can do that regularly.
So the idea of driving while black is
real.
Something that happens.
It's alive and well. It happens to people. It happens to me. It happens to people that I know. I get complaints almost daily in my office about mistreatment on jobs because people think that they think it's because of their skin color that they're being mistreated. Name calling is vibrant. Is alive and well in places that you wouldn't even think that people would call racist names, and that's the kind of thing that happened to Westbrook. I mean, it's common for my experience.
There must be an underlying, almost a pedal tone, to use an organ music kind of term here, but there must be this underlying frustration on the part of our black brothers and sisters who have to go through this kind of thing day in and day out. While the white population, race problem? What race problem? I don't know about any race problem.
Well, it's frustrating on two levels. On the first level, it's frustrating because nobody else seems to know anything about it. They don't experience it. They don't go through it if they're not of the same hue and the same race and so forth. But more than that is the what are the people of power and authority doing, like Gail Miller, to bring about the kind of changes that need to be brought about, and saying to people, we will not them, but we will not tolerate this kind of mistreatment of any of the people in our community. Gail said loudly and clearly, anybody that comes in this arena is going to be treated this way, and we will not allow them to be mistreated otherwise. So that's where the real frustration comes, in addition to what happens to one.
What is the role of white people, and what is the role of people of color, blacks and everybody else, in coming to grips with this situation and diminishing the racist inequalities and white privilege that exist? What are the separate roles?
The two are the same at the start. Both parties, people of color and those of white, have to start by, as COVID did, coming to grips with who they are and where they are themselves. And unless we start there, we'll never get to the other part. But the first part is for each person, whether they are a person of color or a person who's not, saying, yes, I have some skin in this game, and I've got to do this or else. So that's the starting place. The second part is then to get to know somebody else that's different than you. And many of us, in a place where we are the majority or they are the minority, we just make no effort at all to welcome and to get to know people who are different than us. We don't know that we have more in common genetically, in terms of our toilets, in terms of our stoves. My stove turns on with the same kind of knob that everybody else's stove turns on. Yes. But we don't know that because we've never been in the home of a person that's different than us.
Let's talk about genetics for just a moment here. Scientists have shown that when you line us all up as human beings, it doesn't matter what ethnicity we are 99.9% the same. In fact, I remember a story on the news several years back about a black couple that had twins. One of the children turned out to look like their parents, a regular black child, but the other one turned out looking completely like a white child. Straight hair, light skin, the whole thing. And the way they explained it in this story, as I remember, was that of the 30 billion strands of DNA in our bodies, 10 of them, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, make up hair color, skin color, eye color, those kinds of physical features. How do we get to that point? I mean, that tells me that we are far more alike. I mean, we are statistically, exactly the same as each other. How do we get to that point where we actually treat each other like the real brothers and sisters we really are?
As a pastor of a Christian church, I believe that we all started from the same dust or dirt, and that we all have that similarity, that oneness that makes us one. And we've got to come to understand that and then appreciate the differences that make up the spice that's in the life that we enjoy. My father used to tell me all the time, variety is the spice of life. I go to Chuckarama and places like that to eat because I have a choice of what I can eat, and I can eat and be satisfied. And all of us need to get to the place that we can get there.
Many in our community try not to see color and they try to be even-handed and treat everybody exactly the same,
Right.
and figure that if they're doing that, then they're not part of the problem.
Right.
Is that accurate, or
think
is
that-
there more to it than
I
that?
think there's far more to it than that. And I think anytime that a person attempts to say that we are a colorblind society, that they are missing a whole lot of what it means to be a society. A society is a bringing together of differences and appreciating and celebrating and rejoicing over those differences. And until we can appreciate the differences that others bring to the game, then we'll exclude them. When we talk, for example, about things like English only, you are shutting out all of the other languages and saying to people that your language is not as worthy as that of mine is. And when you do that racially, then that's what you are doing, is you're shutting some people out and telling them that they are worthless and have little or no value.
This truly is a complicated, complex, and very sensitive subject for even adults to be talking about, especially those of goodwill who want to make things better.
Right.
How do we go about teaching our children these principles, correct principles when it comes to race relations, in a way that they can, number one, understand and then embrace, and then when those times come when bad actors come on the scene and they are acting badly in regard to racism, how can we help them to identify and then counteract those bad actors? How do we teach our children?
We start the process in teaching our children by being an example, being a model, showing them how to interact with people who are from a different background or of a different skin color or a different race. And we have to set that example. Anything else we do first will fall on deaf ears. So it has to start with the example. Once the example is there, then we have to find the evidence and provide our children with reading materials, with pictures on the wall, with sources. Take them to the right barbershop. Make sure
walk
they
the walk.
Walk the walk.
Or walk the talk,
Yeah,
I say.
yeah. And we've got to do that by then showing them the evidence. And once they have the evidence, then when a situation comes up, we ought to be the first to say, it can't happen. We're not going to allow that to happen. I'm going to take some action to ensure that this never happens to anybody else again.
As a pastor of a significant congregation, you are well aware that the forces of good and the forces of evil have been battling it out for a long, long time. When it comes to racism, how optimistic are you that we can indeed together defeat this demon?
I'm very optimistic that we can defeat this demon called racism if we do two things. One, if we talk about it to each other and interact with one another about it. Secondly, if we educate ourselves about the differences and the value that those differences bring to our society. I'm optimistic, however, I do not believe I will live long enough to see it happen. I'm convinced that we have taken all of these many years that this country has existed, and we haven't gotten it done. And we've been working on it at least since 1865, 1863. Right. And I think it's going to take another couple of lifetimes. I'm hoping that my children will see it, my grandchildren, my great-grandchildren will see a society where all of us have worth and value, and we're judged by the content of our character instead of the color of our skin.
I was going to ask you, and this will be my final question to you. How close do you feel we are to reaching Dr. Martin Luther King's dream of having people judged not by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character? How far away are we from that?
I thought we were fairly close when the previous president of the United States was elected. When he got elected the second time, I knew we were close. But then after that, I'm not so sure that we are close at all. I think we are a long ways from having reached the goal of looking at people and saying, this person is valuable and worthy, has great content of character, and the color of their skin is not what matters.
If you could give us a laundry list, and I know this is a little bit spontaneous, but if you could give us a laundry list of the things that you would think are most necessary to move this ball down the court, so to speak, move the needle, and diminish racism, what would be on that laundry list?
First thing on the laundry list would be continue to pass the right kind of laws, like the hate crime bill, where we say to people, everybody is going to be protected under the law. So pass the laws. Secondly, enforce the laws. And once we get people in place who can enforce the laws, let them then ensure that they do their part in terms of doing that. Thirdly, every individual has to step up and say, it's not just them, but it's all of us. We're in this boat together, and if his end of the boat sinks because it's leaking, then my end is going down too. And then I think lastly, we have to be a prayerful and a spiritual person that says to ourselves, I'm going to be the best person I can be, so that others then can reach their potential.
Reverend France Davis of Calvary Baptist Church, retiring at the end of 2019 after an illustrious career. Thank you so much for being part of Three Questions.
Thank you. My pleasure to be here.